The Bington family, a name synonymous with old-world wealth and power, believed they could acquire anything, including the future. They were prepared to sign a landmark $500 million merger with Neurospace, a tech company built from the ground up by its founder, Danielle Given. But when their polished facade slipped to reveal a deep-seated prejudice, they didn't just lose a deal. They lost a legacy. This is the story of a woman who was invited to a table she had already outgrown, and how her principled refusal to sit there shattered a dynasty's arrogance and rewrote the rules of power. Danielle Given's journey began in a two-bedroom apartment in Trenton, New Jersey, not a Gilded Age estate. The scent of her childhood was not lemon polish and cold money, but the warmth of her Aunt Sarah's cooking and the soft, steady hum of a sewing machine late into the night. Her mother had passed away from lupus when Danielle was 10, leaving her to be raised by a woman who worked two jobs, one at a hospital, the other a side hustle mending uniforms, to keep a roof over their heads. Aunt Sarah was the anchor of Danielle's world, a woman whose hands were calloused, but whose heart was boundless. She taught Danielle that dignity was a non-negotiable currency, and that the work you do is a reflection of who you are, not where you come from. This upbringing forged Danielle's character. She wasn't a prodigy born into privilege. She was a builder forged in grit. She earned a scholarship to Stanford, where she double-majored in computer science and ethics, a combination that reflected her belief that technology without a moral compass was just code without a soul. Her peers came from families with generational wealth, discussing venture capital over lattes and networking at exclusive events. Danielle spent her free time in the public library, a place that felt like home, writing lines of code on a borrowed laptop, fueled by caffeine and an unshakable vision. Her idea was Neurospace, an AI-driven system that didn't just process data but understood context, a decision engine that could aid in everything from hospital triage to supply chain logistics. She started with nothing, but she had something far more valuable, a vision so stubborn it refused to die and an integrity that could not be compromised. By 41, Danielle had transformed Neurospace from a dorm room dream into a tech titan. The company was profitable, purpose-driven, and on the cusp of its next great leap forward. The merger with the Bington Group wasn't just a financial transaction, it was the final validation of a journey defined by struggle. It was a chance to bring her technology to a global scale, to use her creation to change the world. She had worked for this moment for years, but as her sleek black SUV rolled up the Bington estate driveway in East Hampton, a cold, quiet awareness settled over her. She adjusted the collar of her slate gray blazer, a piece chosen not for flash, but for its clean lines and professional authority. She wasn't here to impress. She was here to conclude a business deal she had earned. She was here as an equal, a leader, a partner.
If you are enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means a lot to us. We are just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you. And back to the video.
The Bington estate was a monument to a past that never seemed to end. Its sterile perfection felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit. Charles Bington, the family patriarch, greeted her with an outstretched hand and an aggressively polished smile. His wife, Victoria, a woman in a champagne-colored suit that seemed to have been designed for a different kind of world, offered a welcoming expression that was polite but reserved, as if she were appraising a rare antique. The initial pleasantries were a thin veneer over a deeper, colder atmosphere. The evening's formal dinner was the centerpiece of the weekend's public humiliation. The dining room was immense, with 12-foot ceilings and a mahogany table that could seat 20. Charles, the undisputed lord of this realm, sat at its head, a scotch in hand, holding court. Victoria, with her pearls and impeccable posture, led Danielle to her seat. Not the seat of honor next to Charles. Not even close. She guided Danielle to a spot in the middle, a place of polite neutrality, far from the seats of power where decisions were made and stories were swapped. Danielle's eyes flickered across the table. She instantly recognized the pattern. Charles and his inner circle at the head, their heirs and most trusted business allies flanking them. And then the rest of them. The middle, where she was seated, was for guests who were there to observe, not to participate. It was a subtle act of dismissal, a quiet assertion of the hierarchy. The dinner began, and with it, the slow, calculated dismantling of her professional dignity. A man across from her, with slicked-back hair and a veneer of youthful arrogance, leaned in. "So, you're the genius Charles flew in," he said with a grin. Danielle's smile was cool and tight. "I'm the CEO of Neurospace." He blinked, then the woman next to him chuckled. "Oh, we just assumed you worked in media. You have such presence." The comment hung in the air, a barbed compliment designed to imply she had style but no substance, that her value lay in her appearance, not her intellect. Danielle didn't react. She simply let it land, a quiet, internal note taken. The insults continued, disguised as compliments. An older woman with sharp, inquisitive eyes asked her about her education, a question that was meant not to learn but to verify. "Stanford," Danielle replied, her voice even. "Oh, that's lovely," the woman said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Good for you." The implication was clear. It was a miracle, a happy accident, not a testament to hard work and brilliance. Then, a man with a square jaw and a loosened tie leaned in conspiratorially. "I told Charles the first like this move, getting some color into the portfolio. It's modern, sharp." Danielle's gaze was direct, unwavering. "We're not paint samples, and Neurospace isn't a diversity hire." He chuckled, not hearing her, or perhaps not caring to. No, I meant it's bold. Very next-gen." He was talking about her as if she were a piece of art or a branding strategy, not a human being who had built a company. The room buzzed with the low drone of conversation, but for Danielle, it was filled with the deafening sound of disrespect. The final straw came with Gregory Bington, Charles's middle son. He slid into the empty chair beside her, uninvited, his hair slicked back, his smile a study in unearned privilege. He leaned in, speaking with the casual intimacy of a man who believed every room was his. "Between us, Dad thinks you're impressive, but there's still some concern about the temperament thing." The word temperament hung in the air like a storm cloud. "Yeah, founders like you. You're passionate, driven, but passion can turn into, what's the word? Volatility." He grinned, as if sharing a joke they were both in on. "A $500 million handshake needs more steadiness." Danielle looked at him, not with anger, but with a bone-deep sense of clarity. "Tell me something, Gregory," she said, her voice calm and measured. "If I were a 45-year-old white guy in a Patagonia fleece and all birds, would you still be worried about my temperament?" He blinked, then laughed awkwardly, a nervous, empty sound. "Come on, don't do that. I'm just asking. You don't have to be so sensitive." He was not just challenging her professionalism, he was challenging her right to be in the room, her right to react, her right to have a voice. He was telling her to shrink. And in that moment, Danielle knew she couldn't. She stood. No announcement, no dramatic flourish. She simply stood, her posture straight and her hands steady. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm as stone, and she walked away from the table, leaving the murmurs and whispers behind her. The guest bathroom was a sanctuary of sterile perfection. Danielle locked the door and leaned against the cool marble counter, a single, long exhale escaping her lips. It wasn't a sigh of surrender, but of a weight being released. The insults hadn't stung her on an emotional level. They had clarified the situation with perfect, painful precision. This was never a partnership. It was an acquisition, not of a company, but of a narrative. They wanted to own her success, to put a shiny, modern face on their old-world brand, all while keeping her in a place they felt she belonged, somewhere in the middle. Her phone buzzed in her hand, a lifeline to the real world. It was her CFO, Shauna Kim, back in San Jose. "How's it going?" the message read. Danielle stared at it, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She could lie. She could say it was going well, that a few uncomfortable comments were a small price to pay for $500 million. But she couldn't. Not to Shauna, The woman who had been with her since the early days, the woman who had trusted her vision when it was just code and a dream. She typed, "I'm reconsidering everything." The response was immediate. "Talk to me." Danielle sat down on a cushioned bench, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the clinking glasses and hushed conversations she had just left. "It's not just a bad dinner, Shauna. It's the whole ecosystem. It's who we'd be tied to. Their name would sit next to ours on every letterhead, every press release. Their values would become our values." She typed, her fingers moving with a furious, methodical pace. "I'm not sure I can stomach it. They see a commodity, not a partner. They want to own a piece of next-gen without ever understanding what it actually means to be a founder like me." Shauna's response was a single, powerful sentence that resonated with the foundational principles of their company. "You always said we don't beg for tables. We build our own." That sentence hit her harder than any of the night's microaggressions. It was the truth. She hadn't built Neurospace on inherited wealth or social connections. She had built it with code and caffeine, with a vision so stubborn she couldn't let it die, with the memory of her Aunt Sarah's quiet dignity and late-night work ethic. She had built a company not for validation, but for purpose. Walking away from this deal was a return to that purpose. The money was intoxicating, the potential for global expansion immense, but at what cost? The cost of her integrity. The cost of a lie. The cost of standing in a room and allowing herself to be belittled and dismissed, of allowing her company to be painted as a diversity hire to a bunch of arrogant men who had never built anything in their lives. She walked out of the bathroom, her composure fully restored, her mind clear. She walked straight back to her suite, not to pack, but to open her laptop. Her inbox was a testament to the future. Investors waiting, board members poised for the Monday morning announcement, journalists ready to tell the story of the next great tech merger. She opened a blank draft and typed a single, decisive sentence. "After careful consideration, Neurospace will no longer pursue partnership with the Bington Group." She stared at it, then added, "We believe integrity cannot be negotiated." She hit save, not send. She would sleep on it, as was her practice, but her gut had already decided. And when Danielle Given trusted her gut, it was never wrong. The air outside was thick and gray, but inside her room, a clarity of purpose shone with the strength of a new day's sun. The next morning, the East Hampton Community Center, a humble hall with a row of folding chairs, stood in stark contrast to the gilded cages of the Bington estate. This was Danielle's choice. She would not let their opulent stage be the backdrop for her story. She was dressed in black slacks and a cream blouse, no jewelry, no noise, just a quiet, unshakable certainty. Shauna, who had caught a red-eye flight from California after a late-night phone call, stood beside her, a look of fierce loyalty on her face. Danielle's phone buzzed with frantic texts and calls from her board, from Charles Bington's lawyers, from the Bington Group themselves, but she ignored them all. First, there was the private confrontation. Danielle walked into the Bington's main salon, where Charles and Victoria, their legal team flanking them, were gathered. The mood was stiff, polished, the calm before the storm. Charles, a man used to being thanked, tried to take control. "Danielle," he said, hands clasped, "we need to talk." "We do," she replied, taking a seat. "I appreciate your hospitality, but I've decided to withdraw from the merger." Victoria's polite smile faltered. Charles blinked, the color draining from his face. "I'm sorry. I'm withdrawing," Danielle repeated, her voice calm and steady. Effective immediately. Charles's voice, though still calm, was tight with suppressed rage. "Do you realize the amount of capital you're walking away from? The legal ramifications of this 11th-hour decision?" "I do," she said, looking him dead in the eye. "And I realize the kind of company we'd become if I took it." Victoria interjected, her tone patronizing. "If this is about Gregory's comments, we can assure you, it's not just about Gregory." Danielle cut her off gently but firmly. "It's about tone. It's about positioning. It's about the way you treat leadership you don't recognize as familiar. It's about a conversation where one side is expected to be a decorative addition to the table, not an equal partner at the head. Charles's face turned a deep shade of crimson. If we offended you, Danielle, I apologize. It was a misunderstanding. Danielle smiled faintly. You didn't offend me. You confirmed for me that this was never a partnership. It was an acquisition dressed up as progress. And that is a deal Neurospace cannot make. She stood, her posture a testament to her resolve. You can keep your check. Neurospace will be just fine. Her words wouldn't stay in that room. In a few moments, the world would hear them, too. A plain white backdrop. A simple podium. A microphone. This was Danielle's stage. The room, packed with reporters, was a whirlwind of energy, with flashes from cameras popping like nervous heartbeats. She adjusted the microphone, a stack of note cards in her hand, though she barely needed them. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice steady and clear. I'll keep this short, because clarity doesn't need much time. She looked directly into the cameras, her eyes holding an unwavering conviction. After deep thought and careful consideration, I've chosen to withdraw Neurospace from the pending merger with the Bington Group. A collective gasp swept through the room. Pens scratched faster. Reporters leaned forward, their microphones pushing closer. This decision is final, she continued, and it's not based on money or legal technicalities. It's about something far more important: values. She paused, letting the words sink in. Neurospace was founded with one goal: to build technology that advances human potential. But it was also built on something harder to measure: dignity, accountability, and vision. I've always believed the culture of a company matters just as much as its code. She flipped the card over, her hands steady. In the past 48 hours, I've learned enough to know that a partnership with the Bington Group would compromise the DNA of what we've built. Not because they aren't successful, but because their success was never built with people like me in mind. They invited me to their table, but it was clear from the moment I walked in that I wasn't expected to lead. I was expected to decorate. A murmur moved through the room. This wasn't a business announcement. It was a manifesto. This isn't personal, she went on, her voice rising slightly. This is about principle. Neurospace will grow with partners who see us, not just our numbers. And I say this to every founder, every leader, every woman, every person who has ever been told to shrink in rooms they earn their way into. You do not need to accept disrespect for the sake of opportunity. She finished, her final words resonating with a power that transcended the small hall. We're not in the business of selling out. We're in the business of building up. A pause. Then applause. It started small but grew into a thunderous roar. The reporters shouted questions, but Danielle simply smiled, raised a hand, and walked away from the podium. The aftermath was a whirlwind of chaos, but not for Danielle or Neurospace. For the Bingtons, it was an earthquake. Headlines spread like wildfire. Black woman CEO walks away from $500 million deal over values. Neurospace founder refuses to decorate the table. Danielle's press conference clip went viral, becoming an anthem for anyone who had ever felt overlooked or underestimated. The internet, in its relentless fashion, began to dismantle the Bington's polished image piece by piece. Old interviews of Charles Bington talking over female executives resurfaced. Gregory Bington's college tweets were dug up. Victoria's speech about preserving legacy was exposed as a defense of a bygone era. A key board member quietly resigned. A few sponsors dropped from the Bington Group's quarterly fundraiser. Their PR team scrambled to paint the incident as a misunderstanding, but it didn't stick. Danielle hadn't thrown a tantrum. She had told the truth, calmly and clearly, and the world had listened. At Neurospace headquarters, the mood was electric. Employees wore her words like armor. Someone printed t-shirts that read, "We build, we don't beg." And though Danielle never officially approved them, she smiled when she saw them. The story didn't damage their brand, it fortified it. Investors called, not to scold, but to support. I underestimated what this would do for your brand, one admitted on a call. But you've got loyalty money can't buy. Other partners, smaller, values-aligned companies reached out. Venture firms led by women, BIPOC-owned equity groups, and even international science coalitions all came calling, looking for innovation without ego. A week later, Shauna walked into Danielle's office, a thick folder in her hand. "We got 5 new offers. The Dyson Institute wants to co-develop your defense model into a commercial safety net for urban hospitals." And they said, Shauna grinned, her eyes sparkling, "They'll work under our structure." Danielle finally looked up from her work, a quiet sense of triumph in her eyes. "Now that," she said, "is a different kind of deal." Later that night, sitting alone in her office, the city glowing behind her, she read a message from a young founder she didn't know. "Thank you for showing us how to walk away with our heads high." She stared at it for a long time. She had refused to shrink to fit into a room she had already outgrown. She hadn't just protected her company, she had given others permission to do the same. They had wanted her genius, but not her voice. What they didn't understand was that her voice was the genius. She didn't need their table. She was the table. And the world had just learned a powerful lesson. If you cannot see the value in someone's presence, you will feel the power of their absence. Never trade your values for validation. Never let power silence your purpose. The person you overlook today might just be the hero the world needs tomorrow.